when you dive in deeper and you take off the blinders, you start to see a different picture. And I'd love for you to go into that idea of antidepressants because we were kind of sold, at least I know through the medical side of things and education, that there is a chemical imbalance. That is your problem, has nothing to do with spirit, purpose, anything, traumas. That is it. So it's a very one-to-one connection that you need to be on these SSRI antidepressants. But that's not the case. I know a lot of people are wising up, but still the majority of conventional medicine is very much into here, quick fix is let me give you a prescription for an antidepressant. And you do shift, of course. You feel something when you take this powerful drug. But can you go into that a little bit more of the truth really behind antidepressants and why you kind of moved away from that?
Mm. So when I was moved to question what it is that I was taught because of my experience putting Hashimoto's into remission, of course, I turned toward the prescriptions that I was writing every single day. And I asked the simple question, have I been told the full story? And it turned out that there were several renegade activists, truth tellers like Peter Bregan, for example, who had been, sounding this alarm for decades already. And what I was able to access was the existing literature. Again, so remember, I was not spiritually oriented. I was not interested in theories. I was very practiced at going to pubmed.gov and analyzing a paper. So I walked across a bridge of scientific evidence, from my belief in the chemical imbalance theory and pharmaceutical treatment of so-called mental illness,
Mhm.
all the way to the rather polarizing belief that these medications perpetuate that which they purport to resolve.
Mhm.
So that's pretty shocking, and the book that actually led me to that conclusion is called Anatomy of an Epidemic.
Mhm.
And in that book, there is an analysis of non-industry funded data. So when you learn how to look at data, you want to know things like who paid for this,
Yeah.
study what kinds of conflicts of interest,
Right.
what is being reported in the summary, also known as the abstract, versus like what actually happened in the methodology. So in non-industry funded data, that means that the pharmaceutical industry did not participate in the actual design and implementation of the study. And in this literature, the analysis of this literature concluded that the epidemic of prescribing of psychiatric drugs of all types, but we could just talk about antidepressants. It's really the same story with benzodiazepines, with mood stabilizers, with antipsychotics, that the prescribing and the ever escalating rates of prescription is actually directly correlated with let me say it again, with ever escalating rates of disability,
Mm.
so that when we are drowning in these prescriptions, we are also struggling with, depression being one of the top causes of disability worldwide. Wouldn't those be inversely correlated, right? Like, wouldn't you have more prescribing and less disability? And that's where the actual analysis of the literature, looking at the efficacy of these meds, looking at their undisclosed often, as a prescriber, I was not in a position to disclose this, adverse effects profile and risk profile,
Mhm.
right? Leads you to question, like, what are these meds actually doing? And is there scientific evidence for their role in treatment, right? So the concept of a chemical imbalance, or the monoamine hypothesis, as it's sometimes called, uh, is really an assumption. It's a
Mhm.
myth, you could even say. It's a notion, it's an idea, it's a concept that for 70 years has not held up to scrutiny, right? So there are many theories about how this got floated, into popular consciousness and into the scientific arena. But regardless, studies on postmortem subjects, studies on cerebrospinal fluid, studies on so-called receptor analysis, studies on people who are depleted in things like tryptophan, which is a precursor to
Hmm.
serotonin. Like they've tried so hard to
Yep.
prove that serotonin, for example, has anything to do with depression, let alone that its absence or deficiency drives is causal in the manifestation of what we call depression. And the literature has not borne fruit. Okay. So amazingly, people like Joanna Moncrief, as recently as I think it was like 2 years ago, she did a meta-analysis where she looked at uh, everything. She looked at every single study out there and again came to the same conclusion that there is no chemical imbalance that we can call depression.
Yeah.
Okay. So people are still making this effort. Why are we needing to more than even one time debunk this and dismiss this? Why? Because there's an entire industry with vested interest in this theory. Okay. So
Mhm.
we are currently, anyway, one of 3 countries that allows direct to consumer advertising. So it allows pharmaceutical companies to talk to lay people about their biology, right? So you can learn from a bus stop, poster about your so-called synapses and what's happening with your biochemistry. And it's a very, uh, it's almost like the childlike delight of it being so simple that you could depict it in
Mhm.
little pictures. And also, what I've come to study more and more over the years is the nature of victim consciousness that gets invoked, right? This idea that it's poor me, so sad, no fair. I didn't do it, right? That you get to rest into when you seek out the savior of the system. And the only problem with this is that the villain you're fighting in that triangle is yourself. Right? So you fragment, you split into the part of you that has a very good reason, the best reason, the most benevolent reason for bringing forth what we are calling these symptoms, whether it's fatigue or brain fog or even things like hallucinations, right? The very best reason that actually this is a means and often an effective one of keeping you safe in an unsafe world, or at least one that you perceive to be unsafe, right? So you split between that part and then the part of you that says that's bad.
Mhm.
And the part that says that's bad is the self-rejecting part that allies with the system. And so the chemical imbalance theory is a very convenient way not to take responsibility. It's a convenient way to also invoke this wound that I think we're all walking around with, which is there's something wrong with me. I'm damaged, I'm broken, right?
Yes.
If I can see, oh, well, that's what's missing from me. That's what's off about me. It's just my chemistry. I meet a lot of needs, through this approach to my human experience. But if there is no literature suggesting that's actually the case, you know, then what are these medications doing?